Salutations, and welcome to the RPG engine. This is going to be a general overview video covering the majority of the features that you will need to get up and running with the RPG engine. It is definitely not exhaustive. I would certainly recommend that you search more in-depth videos to get a better handle on the vast resources that the RPG engine has to offer. Here on the main screen, the most important options will be the folder access right here. This will take you to the save location for all of your maps as well as your prefabs. You can click this to open those up. You can then back up prefabs or maps. You can rename them. You can even change maps locations from one campaign to another, or send some of them to a friend if you don't want to use Steam for that. The next one, the cog here, is settings. Gives you a lot of the settings you would expect from games. Graphics. The list of keybinds, I would definitely recommend going over those. Dice roll commands and mathematics inside the dice rolls. You don't have to worry about tweaking all of this here on the main screen. You have access to this in-game as well. Down at the bottom, you have the notes for the latest patch. And most importantly, here on the bottom left, you have these three buttons. We'll start with characters at the bottom. This is a good way for players to come in and create their own character. They'll end up with a blank here, and then they can then pick on the body part they want to change and drop in different parts until they find something that they like. This is also available in the game, so you don't have to worry about them creating characters out here if they forget to do that before they go in and join. The next one up is the player access. Anyone who clicks this will have a list of whoever friends are online and playing. They can then simply join them via Steam. And the top one is for the Game Master. This is for the person who's going to be running the game. Once you click Game Master, you'll be able to start a new campaign. We will call this, very creatively, New Campaign. And once you name your campaign and create it, it will take you into the starting map. When you first join a map, you'll be in play mode, and that's everything that's listed down this left side. Clicking here will send you into build mode, and you can easily flip back and forth between them. The tab button will also swap between them, and if you're in play mode but you want to just quickly affect something, you can hold down the space bar, and as long as you hold down the space bar, you can then move something around. Release space bar, you go right back into play mode. In play mode, you have a number of options. If you click a character, you'll notice that you have the ability to move and different states as well as animations. To very simply move this character somewhere else, you select them, you tell them where they want to go, and they go there. If you want to change their speed that they go there, you simply crank up this dial. States are persistent animation, so if you click one, they will change their stance, and they will hold that until you change it to something else. You also have some very short animations, like attacks or getting struck. And you then have several emotes that are persistent. And at the bottom, you will have something that the players will absolutely abuse, and that is the dance list. And there is a very long dance list. Get used to these as a GM, you're going to see a bunch of them. Now if you right-click a character, you also have a different selection of options. One of which is bars, which allows you to assign different bars, give them names like health, if you can spell health, which apparently I cannot. You can change the numbers by just mousing over one side or the other and rolling your mouse wheel. So your maximum you can change by mousing over the right side and rolling the wheel up. And then your current status you can change by doing the same thing on the left. So now you're 11 of 14. If you put it all the way up to 14, it's full. You can change the color of the bar. You can also make it so characters can see it or not, depending upon the eye, or you can remove them. Also have some effects that you can apply to them. Turning that eye on means the players will be able to see them. It will actually show up in play. If you don't want players to see them, then just tick that to closed. Removing them is simply clicking on them up above. You also have the move command here, works the same way as it does with the right click. And then you have rulers that start from the character itself. Linear sphere or the navigation. The navigation will try to move around things so you can see where they're going to possibly go, but it won't actually send them there when you click. Linear ruler is just that. Draws a straight line, gives you an exact measurement, and the sphere ruler is just as it says on the 10. Gives you a bubble for how big it's going to be. You also have access to these rulers with a right click on any part of the board that has a grid. So you still have access to these things for like explosive radiuses without actually having to have a character there. Also available on a right click is your ping, and this is just a way to draw attention to something. The next option on characters is the chat. Gives you a little word balloon over people. And the last thing is the settings. Now this allows you to lock characters down so people can't move them, lock anything that's attached to them like weapons you might put on their back, or even hide them from view from the players. If you add them to the turn, it will put them into the turn order, which we'll go over here in a little bit. And most importantly, assign control. This allows you to basically give this character to a player so the player can then affect them, move them around, change stats, what have you. Now, for our play mode options, going from top to bottom here, we have the social menu. This has a variety of things from special effects, and there is a pretty big list of these to go through, to the regular chat menu, where you can send messages back and forth between the other players if you're not talking over something that's a VoIP. You also have all of your dice here. You can type in commands and simply hit enter, and it will kick some dice out for you. And if you resend it without changing anything, it just keeps whatever the last entry was, and clearing it makes it go away. You also can just kick out a single die of any sort by right-clicking on any of these. So nice, fast, and easy. If you left-click on these, it adds these into whatever your expression is here. So if you put in 5d12, 7d6, a couple of d4s just to keep everybody honest, then it adds them all in. A word of caution, you can get an absolutely stupendous amount of dice. Players will do this, so you can expect this kind of shenanigans, along with characters dancing among all of this. Your player list tells you who's in the game, also allows you to send people to maps. And then here's your turn order. So anyone that you had right-clicked on, went to settings, and then added to the turn will show up right here. You can use the up and down arrows to change their positions. Next we have documents. The first here is a very powerful sheet system. Allows you to import images to use as like a character sheet. You can also just create things over a backdrop. You can have entry boxes, dice expressions, toggle buttons to turn things on and off. You can cross-link different functions. Very powerful. I am not going to get into it because it needs a video all of its own. Next up is the PDF viewer, where you can import a PDF and also drop boxes onto it to add information to it. And lastly, you have your good old web browser. Works just like it says on the 10. You can link to any page you want to for notes if you're doing character sheets at a different site. If you just like tracking images and showing them to people, it's all available here in the web browser. After that, we have the map controller. If you have multiple maps, this lets you swap between them. This check mark tells you which map is going to be your default. This one is very cleverly labeled default as it shows up. Allows you to save them to Steam to share, You can also get an overhead view shot of it and export it. You can move your players to it. If you want a brand new one, then hitting the new button will bring up your selection of default maps that come with the RPG engine, access to the workshop where there is a ton of maps already available, or you can make a blank map. We'll start with that. We'll need a map name. You then have your settings for how big the terrain is going to be. Your width and your depth is the horizontal portion of it. The height is how deep the sculptable terrain is. We're going to make this a 50 by 10 by 50. Word of warning, if you have a lot of sculptable terrain, it can make the map relatively large, can take a while to send it to people. I tend to build most of my terrain out of actual props in the game as opposed to sculpting. It just keeps the file size down. So then we create map, and it kicks it out real fast. Next up, we have the audio controller. This has a list of songs, and you can add them all to your track list. You can pitch in, if you like one song a lot, you can pitch it in a lot. You can vary them, and then you can move them up and down just like you would in the turn order by clicking the up and down arrows, and then trash any of them that you're just tired of listening to. One thing to keep in mind with all of these windows that open up, this is a minimize. If you click on it, it removes it to this little square. You can then move this square to wherever you want to keep it out of the way, and then every time you click it, this will pop up wherever you had placed it. Generally people try to keep them together, but that's not strictly necessary. The other nice part of this is that if you have this out and you go into build mode, it's still available. Now hitting tab to go to build mode, the first thing that pops up is your prop list on the building menu. To get a prop in, you just simply click once, and then you have that prop in your hand. Clicking again will put him on the map. There's a search function, and there's also different folders to start with, so you can start finding down what you're looking for. So if you're going into structures and then tents and covers, then you can just bring out whatever you need once you find it. There's also a search box, so if you want a chair, simply typing in chair will bring up a selection of likely candidates. The search also works with partial strings, so if you wanted something, for instance, like a wagon, simply typing in wag will bring up pretty much just wagons, because there's not a lot else that will use that string of characters. Or if you happen to know the name of the asset pool things come in, like the post-apocalypse set, you could type in APOC, and it will show you everything that is in the apocalypse set, and most likely exclude pretty much everything else from all of the other sets. Now if you notice these symbols on the icons, they all have their own meaning or their own function. First up is your favorites. If you click on this and highlight that, then this chest will be added to your favorite list. And then if you want to see your favorites, you merely click on that, and then it brings up all of your favorites. If you click on this one, it basically hides this from view. You can still get to it by clicking on the star the second time. This is all of your hidden stuff, so then you could go back in, and if you decided you like something after all, want it back out in the regular mix, you can then unhide it and bring it back out. This color wheel means that that particular item has color variance. And if you click on it in build mode, you'll notice right here it has color variation, and you can cycle through all of the possibilities with this slider. All items also have prop color abilities. That is a very uniform color distribution though. So if you wanted this chest to be a little bit green, you can get away with that, but the more green you make it, the more all of the other detail disappears. So use it sparingly, or try to find stuff with color variations if you want some variety. And lastly, there is the number. The number will denote animations on something. Maybe not strictly separate animations. This one has the open command right there, but it has to slide back and pivot at the same time, so it lists it as a 2. You'll notice that the characters themselves have a very long list, and that's because of obviously all of their dance animations and their stances and everything else that counts as an animation. Now if you want to manipulate items that are already out in the world, you can simply hold left click on them and drag them where you want, and then release. If you drag something to the edge of the board, suddenly it stops moving. It's because it has no solid surface to attach to. If I release my left click right here, it will actually delete itself. That is a major oops. Control Z undoes and brings it right back to where its last position was. Control Z, very, very useful in lots of situations. Or you can click it once, and this will bring up your handles. Generally, you start in move mode, and you can grab one of these arrows and drag it in the direction the arrow indicates. Or you can grab it on a planar control and drag it on one of 3 planes. Your other option is stretch. The bars and the planes work the same way, except now you're just controlling which way you distort and drag the item in question. If you hover over this box, it actually changes its scale uniformly in all directions. And lastly, we have rotate. And in this mode, clicking and dragging on these rings lets you spin an item in any of 3 different directions. This blue ring is based on which angle you're viewing it from, and it turns it flat in relation to your camera. So if I position it right here, and then I spin that blue ring, it rotates it right around the view of the camera. If you decided you've really messed up an item and you want it to return to normal, you hit R, and that reverts it to its natural state. The easiest way to access these 3 modes is with the 2, 3, and 4 key. You will get a lot of use out of those 3 keys when you're building. While we're building, we'll go over some of the most important settings here of this cog, one of which is multiplace. Multiplace allows you to place a whole bunch of things without having to go back to the build menu and click on it over and over again. So if I wanted a ton of alien trees per se, then I would turn multiplace on, and now when I click, the tree is still in hand to drop back in again and again and again. With spawning and multiplace, you can also change the orientation of an item. Y is the flat plane, so if you turn this box on and crank Y to max, it will then randomly turn the item that you're dropping in to a different angle every time you place it. You can also turn off the uniform scale by clicking this box and saying what kind of size range you want. So this is a size of 1:1. They come in at the exact same size every time. But let's say if you wanted things that would be slightly smaller, 80%, and slightly larger, 120%, then you would change these 2 numbers. And now, when you're doing multiplace, every successive click will bring in something of a different rotation and a different size. We'll want something that doesn't already look very uniform like that, so we will go with these trees instead. The first one will look just like it should right out of the box, but the next one changes. And the one after that, and the one after that. If you want even more variation, you can also turn X and Y up just a little bit and turn them on, and then it will give these things a slight tilt as well. So as you can see, very useful for making large swaths of something that you want variation on. Now that I've got all of this mess out here and I want to get rid of some of it, easiest way to get rid of things is to hover your mouse over something and hit the delete key. The next function we'll talk about is grid snapping. That option is here. You turn it on, you can then have things snap to any increment that you want to plug in here compared to your grid size. So let's find something that will fit well in the grid. Now as you can see, every time you bring something in, it wants to snap at half-meter increments. And that's stuff that's already there, as well as new stuff. You can do the same thing with walls. Makes building structures pretty quick. That way you don't have to very finitely maneuver them to get them just so. One thing I should also cover is when you're clicking through the folder structure, you can also back up by clicking right up here in this string without having to go all the way back to the beginning. Next we'll talk about the terrain manager. And this allows you to paint on the landscape as well as sculpt it if you have this sculptable landscape. In this case, we'll start with some paint. You simply toggle that on and paint away. You can make the strength stronger, and you can change the color here with the color picker. Switching to sculpt, you can also dig into or build up the terrain by holding down that left click, just like you were painting, except now you're painting with the terrain itself. Again, you can change the size as well as the strength. While you're sculpting, if you hold down the Alt button, it will instead burrow. Or you can switch this toggle right here, and then holding down left click normally is the dig tool. Holding down Alt will make it be the build up tool. Next is Fog of War. In the RPG engine, the Fog of War you paint on, and to the GM, anything that's painted looks like this gray color, just lets you know that that thing is covered by Fog of War. For players, however, that stuff will be so matte black that they can't see any detail. The only thing you have to worry about is the background. You can also clear it all with a single click, or you can paint it on and then toggle this and uncover whatever it is you want them to actually see. Now we're going to cover the cutout box. The cutout box comes in as an item. You can manipulate it like any other item, drag it around, resize it, maneuver it wherever you want it to be. The thing with the cutout box is when you turn it on, it sees through things. Very handy for looking into buildings where players are going to be playing on the inside of, or inside of caves, whatever you need them to be able to see into. You can turn it at angles as you need. You can even turn it on so it affects the terrain too, or just items. Now we'll dive into the atmosphere system. One of the very first options you'll notice is the GM override. This basically makes everything very bright for when you're building as a GM. Makes it easier to see things, especially if you have some very dark ambiance for the game and you want to actually like maneuver things and see things while you're putting them down. Next up is the position of the sun, as well as how high in the sky it is, and how bright it is. Change the main light color and the ambient color, or you can reset everything to a default. Here in your weather, you have background clouds that very slowly move through the sky. You can get rid of those if you want. You also have fog, which if you turn it on gives you a sense of distance for far away things, as well as mistiness along the ground if you bring its height up as well. And lastly, you have a pretty good selection of skyboxes to mess with. We'll go with a pleasant cloudy area. And lastly, we have the grid settings. Grid settings is, as you would expect, the thing that affects your grid. You can change them to hexes. You can even change them to just lines in one direction or the other. Most people stick with squares. You can change the grid size here. Everything is set up to be set in meters. So the grid size depends entirely on meters. So if I change this to 3, I suddenly have a 3-meter grid. You can increase the line width as well make it more visible. You can change how opaque it is. Then there's the unit multiplier. This is handy for when you want to change to something like 5-foot squares. If you wanted to do that, you would need to do some basic maths to figure out that 1.5 meters is about 5 feet. Close enough for government work anyway. And then you would change the multiplier to 5. So you're seeing one grid space, but it will measure it 5 feet for every space. So now, if you are in play mode, and you click on your character and you tell him to move, instead of moving 2 meters or 3 meters, he's moving 10 feet. This also persists through the rulers. That is your basic overview on the RPG engine. Please feel free to dig into any and all of the tools, poke stuff, see what works for you, see what doesn't. Happy gaming.